Well, this is the second week in a row that we've heard about John the Baptist. And today we pick up with him after Herod has thrown him into prison. His mission of prophecy is over, and he's awaiting a death sentence. He sent his disciples to ask Jesus whether he is the one to come. Now, most of us would think that simply means something like, "Are you the Messiah?" And that wouldn't be incorrect. It's just that it's not entirely what John's disciples are asking. And notice that John himself does not ask, "Are you the Messiah?" But instead, are you he who is to come? Now here he's referring to the book of Isaiah, chapter 35, as we would know it today. That also happens to be our first reading today, and I'll get into that shortly. One of the problems here, though, is that Jesus is not quite as direct in his answers as we would like to hear. You have to remember that his time in active ministry was very brief, maybe around 3 years. And during that ministry, he was routinely opposed and attacked and ridiculed by those in charge. And he was on a mission, and he had to guard himself from premature dangers that could have interrupted that mission. So at times, Jesus can sound a bit evasive in his answers, if only to protect his mission until it was complete. And so he doesn't tell John's disciples that, "Yes, you're right, I am the Messiah." Instead, he tells them to inform John what they have seen, and he gives them a list of what he has done. The blind regain their sight, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the poor have good news proclaimed to them. And then he adds this little addition, "And blessed is the one who takes no offense at me." So what Jesus is telling John's disciples is that they should go back and read the prophet Isaiah, chapter 35, which again happens to be our first reading. I mentioned last week that the Jews of Jesus's day knew their scriptures very, very well. And since by the time of Jesus, Isaiah's writings had been in circulation for more than 700 years, they would have known Isaiah quite well. Now, our first reading today is a kind of prophecy about a future age of salvation. And Isaiah is writing about a new age and a kind of renewal of all creation as well. And that creation itself, the wilderness and the desert and the trees and the flowers and the mountains, all of them will rejoice because the Lord will be coming. And Isaiah says that when God comes, the eyes of the blind will open, as will the ears of the deaf. The lame will walk, and the mute will speak. In other words, Jesus is telling John and his disciples that there are very well-known signs to look for when the Lord comes. Again, the blind will see, the lame will walk, and the deaf will hear. But Jesus also adds a couple of other signs. Lepers will be cleansed, and the dead will be raised. Now, regarding the curing of leprosy, the assumption in the Old Testament was that there were some miracles that only God could perform. And so when Jesus says that he has healed the lepers, he's actually pointing to his identity as the God-man, a sort of extra bonus for those who weren't anticipating a visit from the Lord just yet. And Jesus goes on to say that the dead are raised up, which Jesus adds as another sign. And this prophecy comes from another section of Isaiah, which said that when God comes, the dead will be raised. And finally, Jesus says, "Blessed is anyone who takes no offense at me." Now, why would he say that? Well, he's telling us that he's not only the Messiah, the anointed King of Israel, but he's also the divine Son of God, God come in person. As we know now, There are going to be a lot of people who will take offense at that notion, if only because it's too hard for them to believe. And in fact, eventually, and as Jesus already knows, he's going to be killed for that. And the charge will be blasphemy, making himself equal with God. Now, we'll have more to say about that later as we move into Lent and Holy Week. But for today, just know that Matthew and the church want you to know that there were old, ancient, and well-established prophecies that were also well understood, that established the signs that would identify God's promised arrival on earth. Jesus, and no one else, was precisely fulfilling all the prophecies that God had made about him. And Matthew is telling us in no uncertain terms that in the person of Jesus, God has come to heal and save his people. Now today, we're also celebrating the feast of Our Lady of Guadalupe. And we recall the apparitions of Mary at the hill at Tepeyac in modern-day Mexico City from December 9th through the 12th of 1531 to St. Juan Diego. Our Lady of Guadalupe is the patroness of all the Americas, and so this celebration is a kind of celebration of Mother's Day for the entire church in both North and South America. Juan Diego himself was a native Mexican who worked as a weaver and a farmer and a laborer. He lived a very simple life. He was a convert to the faith, and he had a very deep devotion to the Blessed Sacrament. One day, as he was walking, he saw a beautiful young woman dressed as an Aztec princess. And she told him that she was the Virgin Mary, and she asked Juan to tell the bishop to build a church on that site so that she could be present in it, and so she could give her love and her compassion and her help and her defense. Juan Diego replied that he was a nobody, but she insisted anyway that he go. And so he did. And while the bishop was kind to him, he was also skeptical. And so he asked Juan to bring proof of the lady's identity. Before Juan could go back to the lady, he found out that his uncle was dying. And so he hurried to get a priest and had to miss his appointment with the lady. However, she met him on his way and told him that his uncle had been cured. And then she told him to climb to the top of the hill where they first met. Well, he did that, and he was shocked to find flowers growing in the frozen soil. He gathered them in his cloak, or his tilma, as it's called, and took them right away to the bishop. And he told the bishop what had happened, and then opened his cloak. The flowers that fell to the ground were Castilian roses, which were not grown in Mexico, and certainly not at that time of the year. The bishop saw the roses, but his eyes were on the glowing image of Mary that was imprinted on Juan's cloak. And we can see several representations of it here. I've seen it in person, and it looks way better than these, and it's 500 years old. And so a church was built on the site where the lady appeared, and many thousands were converted to Christianity. And for a while, Juan lived near the church and was revered as a holy, unselfish, and compassionate servant of God. And the cloak of Juan Diego, or the tilma as it's called, continues to amaze and inspire. It's made of cactus leaves that should have rotted away after 10 or 15 years. And it still supports a fresh and vibrant image after nearly 500 years. Our Lady's image is definitely that of a pregnant young woman, and every detail of that image is important. It's filled with Aztec symbolism, and the illiterate natives would have been able to read it like a book. I won't get into interpreting it. There's a lot to interpret in that image. But the people of that time would have understood that Mary's unborn child is the center of the divine universe. Moreover, the Spaniards were having a very difficult time gaining converts to Christianity in the New World prior to this apparition. But afterward, there was a tsunami of converts. And I want you to keep in mind that this was at the same time as the Protestant Reformation in Europe, when people were leaving the church in huge numbers. But the numbers in Mexico swelled by an estimated 20 million within a decade of Mary's appearance. Today, more than 7 million people go to see that image every year. And it's the site of many healings and conversions. And this is what Mary said to Juan Diego. Am I not here who am your mother? Are you not under my shadow and protection? Are you not in the folds of my mantle, in the crossing of my arms? Because deep in her heart, Mary is a mother who loves each and every one of us. She asks nothing for herself. It's all for her son, Jesus. And so today, we embrace Mary, our most holy mother of Guadalupe.